Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. And today we have a special guest who is the creator of Abil JS. It's a framework to create static site, or it's a static site generator basically. And we will be discussing a lot about Abil. So, welcome, Saurabh. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Saurabh, would you like to introduce yourself to this to everyone on the chat?
Um, yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Saurabh. I work at Razor as a front-end engineer, and when I'm not working, I just do open source or I like going to the. Just give me a second.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
So yeah, I like going on treks, like not now,
Mhm.
but generally, and
Yeah.
yeah, I do open source. I'm working on a static site
Mhm.
generator, which we're going to talk about today.
Cool. So, if you're not aware, so Saurabh has been working on a static site generator called Abell, and its documentation is available. Let me just share the link. So, so, so this is where you can read more about the framework, and we are going to discuss more on the framework itself today. So let's talk about before we go ahead and talk about your framework, right? So Saurabh, let's talk about static site generator. What is a static site generator? How you will introduce it to someone new who is coming to front end development?
Sure. Let's talk about what static sites are first. Actually, I have a demo.
Mm-hmm.
It's a short like explanation on how things work. So maybe I can share my
Mm-hmm.
screen and show that.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, just share my screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it's now. Just I think just increase the font a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah, sure.
let's talk about what static sites are
Mm-hmm.
first. I have these examples.
Mm-hmm.
So a static site is just what we've been doing forever. A simple index.html page with the content in it.
Yep.
Nothing fancy. You can add CSS here. You can add JavaScript. There is no build step. And if I run this, I can just go to static sites. I'm just using a static server. This
Mm-hmm.
is like so to this server. Um, I can go to view page source. As you can see, I have hello world, and this is the code. The same code that we write just goes to the browser, and we see it. All the
Mm-hmm.
content is already there in the HTML. So this is
Right.
static site, what we've been doing forever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now, then we have some different ways of rendering things. So the right question to ask here is, how is your content rendered? Is it rendered
Mm-hmm.
directly? Or is it there just there in the HTML, or is it
Mm-hmm.
rendered on the server where server renders it, or is it rendered by the JavaScript file where JavaScript injects content inside the DOM? So we can talk about client-side rendered then.
Mm-hmm.
Client-side rendered, I have this example with vanilla, just a simple
Mm-hmm.
setup, nothing fancy. Again, an HTML page, a div
Mm-hmm.
with the ID root, and I just add a script index.js. And inside this index.js, I just do select this root element and add this content hello and rendered in the I'm rendered on the client side. If I
Mm-hmm.
go to this demo with vanilla, and again just serving it directly. As you can see, it is showing me the content. But now question is, where is this content actually written? Where is this content coming from? If I go to view page source, as you can see, the root is still empty. So this
Mm-hmm.
content is rendered by JavaScript. As we saw, the JavaScript just injects the content inside the HTML.
Mm-hmm.
So this is client-side render, where client is responsible, where the JavaScript on the front end is responsible for putting content inside the HTML.
Mm-hmm.
This is how almost all of the basic setup of the frameworks work. So I also have example with React. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this is like default React setup. So simplify. Again, I am client-side rendered with React. If I go to view page source, as you can see the similar setup where I have a root and just some JavaScripts injected by React.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually rendered by React. So okay, this I have this src. So this content is rendered by React on client side, where JavaScript is responsible for rendering. So we talked about static sites where the page is just static, where you just have
Mhm.
HTML. Then now we talked about client side where we have a placeholder element, and then
Mhm.
things are rendered by JavaScript on the client side.
Mhm.
Next up we have server side. Um, so if I go to server side demo, close this. I have this simple with node demo. Server
Mhm.
side is, as you can like imagine from the name, it is where the content is rendered by the server. This is a terrible example. You can't really use it in production, but just nice example to give. So here, what I'm doing is I just have an Express app, and when I hit the slash URL, I just return this content and send it to the user. So I can run
Mhm.
this. It's with node salsi. I don't have any setup, so I'm just running directly with Node. As you can see, I'm
Mhm.
rendered on server. One difference you'll see here is so this is actually a static content. There is no reason for it to be server side rendered. So if
Mhm.
I put some, let's actually put something like new date,
Mhm.
and if I reload this, as you can see, this content is rendered by server. If I go to view page source, I still see this complete content in the HTML. There isn't any
Mhm.
JavaScript file injected.
Right.
If I reload this page, you can see that time is changing, which means
Mhm.
this content is created when we hit the slash URL,
Mhm.
and you can see this change time in the source as well. This time will change as well.
Mhm.
So this is server side rendered where we are rendering things on server side. We have more, as I said, this is like a terrible way to do things. It's just a string and we are just sending string. But
Right.
there are like nicer things built on top of this. For example, we have Next.js,
Mhm.
which takes React and does
Mhm.
this, but we have a better way of writing code.
Mhm.
So that's server side rendered. I can show with Next as well. This is similar. Um, just React,
Mhm.
and we run next start, and it gives us the code. I can show this as well. So this is server side rendered. So we
Mhm.
saw this is this command npm render. Um, so yeah, again, this is rendered by Next.js.
Mhm.
If you see this content, um, they actually minified it, but I can search for, yeah,
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
content is there in the HTML only, and it is rendered by the server. So
Mhm.
as we saw, we talked about static sites where we just have content directly in the HTML, client side where the content is rendered by JavaScript, the front end JavaScript,
Mhm.
and server side where the server is responsible for forming content and giving out content.
Right.
uh, Now, these are the different ways of rendering things. Now,
Mhm.
what we are going to talk about today is a static site generator. Um,
Mhm.
let's just remember this part. This is a static site, right? So,
Right.
static site generator is something that adds an additional step to
Mhm.
give this as an output. Now, if you see here, we can't really do 3 plus 4. HTML
Mhm.
doesn't understand maths.
Right.
If we have to do this, we'll have to do it in JavaScript,
Mhm.
and then again it will become a client side application. So we there are like a level of dynamic things that we need to do, which can be done on the build step. So
Mhm.
this is what static site generators are. So this is Abil.
Mhm.
Now this is the Abil code. As you can see, I have index.abil
Mhm.
in package.json. I am running Abil serve for as a dev server, and Abil build for build. And if I go to here, I'll just go back in static site generator. Um, I'll run dev command, which runs
Mhm.
Abel serve. Let's go to localhost 5000. And yep, we can see this. I have hello world, and I just printed the date object. So now difference between a server side rendered application and a static site generator would be we create HTML. So debug is the file where HTML is created during the dev server. So we create this HTML page on the build step. So we don't really have anything dynamic happening when we deploy to the servers. What we deploy is a static HTML page with just a direct content in it. Now, if I just see the date, here it prints 200949. If I refresh page, it will still stay the same. It won't really
Uh-huh.
change because this is actually rendered when we ran the dev server. It will
Mhm.
change, however, if I just change something and run, because it rebuilds things,
Mhm.
and then this time will be different. So this is 2010 now. So
Mhm.
this is where like things are different from the server side. So that's basically a static set generator. We just output this static HTML page.
Mhm.
So I hope that explains.
Uh, I understood it perfectly. So thanks for going into deep and explaining each concept which we have, especially
Yeah.
server side rendered and client side rendering, right? So it is really important to understand in case you want to choose SSG as probably a way for your application. So you have to be aware what server side rendering does and what your client side rendering does and where SSG fits in. So perfectly explained, Saurabh. Thanks a lot for that.
Yeah.
So now let's move on to the next question which we have. So what about the features which Abell offers? So can you
Hmm.
just give us a walkthrough what is included in Abell?
Sure. I can share my screen again. We can just go through documentation together. And
Uh-huh.
documentation has a nice explanation of things. So I hope my screen is visible now.
Yes.
So yeah, this is Abel's documentation. You can go to abiljs.org and it will have all the documentation. This is how you start a project. We'll go to this step later. For features, again, this is like starter if you want to just click and deploy and click and create a project on GitHub. So just trying to
Mhm.
get easier. And sponsors, there's Santosh here. So yeah, Abel, the features. Now, one of the things that I was targeting is to have the syntax as familiar as possible, because
Mhm.
if you generally see static site generators, they're either Hugo is built in Go, and then EJS is JavaScript, but then it has a lot of template part to it, where the
Right.
for loops there is a way of writing for loops or a way of doing if loops. So I rather wanted something that is something that the syntax that we can understand directly, something that we are familiar with.
Mhm.
Generally, when we do web, what we are familiar with is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So out of this, JavaScript is something that allows us to do dynamic things. So what I
Mhm.
decided to do is just run this JavaScript on the build step. So the way it works is I have this. If I write index.abel this, then the way syntax is I can write HTML and then I can write JavaScript inside the curly braces. All the
Mhm.
JavaScript that I write inside the curly braces is executed on the build. So what I eventually get in the output is this a static content. There isn't any dynamic thing here, but it allows me to do dynamic things on this part where I can just root to uppercase. So it printed word in the uppercase. So it allows you to do these things. So the one feature was definitely um, to try to have syntax that is more familiar to users.
Mhm.
Then output what is needed. So if I build, let's say I have these 4 files and none of them actually, I don't write any JavaScript in these files. It's just HTML and let's say a little bit of CSS. In that case, so if it is just HTML, it will just output HTML. If it is HTML plus CSS, it will output HTML and a bundled CSS. So
Mhm.
it outputs only the parts that we need. Uh, if we try to do this on a client-side rendered application, it'll still output an JavaScript file, because it all the content that is need to be rendered, it is actually JavaScript is responsible for that. So you need JavaScript. But
Right.
here, since I have this control, I can just output the HTML and
Mhm.
completely ignore JavaScript and CSS if it is not needed. Then this part we can go through this during demo. Control over
Mhm.
bundling. So I can write things inside the style and write things inside the script, and
Mhm.
just say bundle footer, and this will be bundled under footer. We can talk about this in detail when we do demo. And yeah, we can. use JSON based websites. So I can just import JSON, loop over JSON. We can do tricky things with Node.js. As I said, the things that I write inside curly braces is just JavaScript. It's a Node.js.
Mm-hmm.
So I can use the Node.js packages. I can use the npm packages directly, and I can just do all the tricky things and just basically try to do. For example, here I'm importing this remarkable markdown package, a package that
Mm-hmm.
turns markdown into HTML. This isn't built for Abel. This is built for Node.js. So there isn't any Abel specific things in it, but it just works since inside the curl braces we're writing Node.js. So it just
Mm-hmm.
works. This thing works. I can just read the introduction.md
Mm-hmm.
here, and it just reads it. Then it renders markdown to HTML, and what I print here is HTML. So yeah, these are the features, some of the features. A few ways I'm going to target going further is just trying to get APIs right and trying to make it seem like less magic, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times what happens is you run a command and something happens, you get the output, but you don't really understand what is happening inside. I
Right.
feel React is doing a lot pretty well in that case, where you have a good, really nice API where you can render things to particular element. Even Vue 3 is doing amazing in that part. So I think that is kind of where I really want to go with static site generators, where we have a very understandable API.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's great. So yeah, let's move on to the demo. So you said you have
Sure.
created some demos. So let's see.
Sure. So I'll actually just quit this and
Mm-hmm.
have this blank HTML. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really set up anything. It's a blank folder. We can just ideally we can run this command and we'll get a starter code. But
Right.
for demo, I think it's better to like go from scratch. So I have this blank HTML file. Is my VS Code visible?
No, it's your browser.
Yeah, I'll have to share my okay. It is now, right?
Yep. Now it's visible.
Yeah, so I have nothing in this folder. It's a completely blank folder. What I'll do is
Mm-hmm.
just create a theme file and create an index.abel file. And
Mm-hmm.
we can write some, let's forget about Abel for now. Let's just write some HTML. So I'll write hello.
Mm-hmm.
And here I can just run. So npx is the command that we use to directly run scripts over npm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just, without installing, I'm just running the Abel server. So
Mm-hmm.
as you can see, it ran the dev server, and I can see hello here. I can make changes, and it will just reload and show me the changes. So this is just HTML. It just works directly. Now what we need is some dynamic. We want to be able to do some dynamic things here. What we can do is just have curly braces, and let's just do const a equals to 3 and const b equals to 9,
Mm-hmm.
and here we can just print that. So as I said, everything inside curly braces is JavaScript. So everything that we do just works. As you can see, that 12,
Mm-hmm.
I can change the number and it will change. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a very basic example where I can just have execute any sort of JavaScript. I can even do const word equals hi, and if I just do word dot let's actually have some more words, and I can do slice again the JavaScript function. This is exactly JavaScript, so it
Mm-hmm.
removed the first two words. So we can use everything that is in there in the JavaScript. So that's one thing. So you don't really have to learn any new syntax. Now, usually till this step, a lot of static site generators do well, where we define variable and print variable. The place where some template engines get a little complicated is when you have to
Mm-hmm.
loop over something. So say
Mm-hmm.
if I have an array called projects and have this object with say title my project one, my project one, and let's just say description, just writing something, and let me just add more keys. Let's say project 2, project 3. Now I want to print this. Oh yeah, it also like shows you error and where the error is. So I can just go here and it will take me here. That word is not defined because I just removed it.
Uh-huh. Right.
So I'll remove this part. Let's just add something.
Mm-hmm.
Now what I want to do is I want to loop over this projects array.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing that we can do in Abell is just console log this, and it will log things over here. So if there's some variable and you're not sure what is there inside, you can just log it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we know the project is defined and it has these things. I can do projects dot map. Map is again a JavaScript
Mm-hmm.
function, and inside this, I can just return an HTML. I can just return a string.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just do. I'll just print title. So
Mm-hmm.
project title div. I missed something. What did I miss?
Missing. You have somehow okay curly brackets and
Yeah.
at the start. Yep. So you are missing a curly bracket, right? So after arrow function, open curly bracket.
Uh, oh yeah, I added extra curly bracket. Yep,
Okay.
I think.
That's not required.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is for syntax highlighting. I can remove this and it will be taken as a string. But if you want syntax highlighting for HTML, then
Mm-hmm.
it's just a nice workaround for this.
Oh,
So I have this div. As you can see, I have my project one, my project two, my project three. It just printed what I returned. So
mm-hmm.
you can do this. I can also print the description. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just adding it directly here. It will probably like print it after next to it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it printed description. So what we get is this is a normal JavaScript syntax again,
Mm-hmm.
something that you'll come across in JavaScript. If you don't want map, what you can also do is just return. You can do this and
Mm-hmm.
I'll just comment this out. Just remove this. I don't know why the syntax is relating. And I can return something. So it also prints it. So if you want to use for loop, you can also just have variables and build an array and just return what you want. So you also get the um, ability to use for loops, or I can just even do if something and return this, else return that. You can I can use the ternary operators. So if true, I am true, or it can print false.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to do this JavaScript things. I can
Mm-hmm.
just change this to false and it will print a false.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you get a JavaScript syntax. Now in most of the cases, what we'll need is we'll have this thing inside, let's say a JSON file.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say data. Data is not necessary. You can just directly have it. I'm just writing it inside data anyway. Then have project.json and say title. I am title and again description something. Just go back to that previous one
Mm-hmm.
where I had projects and map. We can reuse that part. Yep. So instead of having it defined here, what I can do is require it from
Okay.
data slash projects.json.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say now again it just printed I am title something. I
Mm-hmm.
can go change things inside here and it will reload. It will print it. So we can use JSON directly. We can
Mm-hmm.
also have it as a JS file. In fact, I can
Mm-hmm.
rename this to JS, and I can just say module dot exports. Can we export array like this? And I'm not sure. And here we'll change it to. Yep, it's working.
Ah, that's
So I can change it here.
Mhm.
So I can also have like functions and any helper
Mhm.
functions defined, and basically you get to do these things where you don't really have to learn any new syntax. I can just use what I know. So that's an advantage. So yeah, we covered the additions, we covered the usual syntax, then we
Yeah, that's
covered.
good. So just a question here. So in case I have to get the data from, let's say, some API, so
Hmm.
where should I write my fetch call? It should be in your index.abel, or I can just write it in my JS file and just return the array. So what do you suggest?
Yep. So ideally, oh yeah, we didn't cover the components part. So
Mm-hmm.
ideally, what when we're writing a fetch call, you probably would want to write it inside a client side rendered inside a
Okay.
client side JavaScript. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll probably be something like a script, and then we write it inside the script the way we do it in HTML. So that is probably where you would want your API calls to be in general. Because what will happen here is if I write any API call here and
Mm-hmm.
let's say I deploy it, now this thing is executed on the build.
Mm-hmm.
So that API will give me values. It will always give me values that were true when the day we executed build.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
we it won't really have the latest values in the API. So
Mm-hmm.
you can generally use it if you have an API that returns you block content. In
Mm-hmm.
that case, you can just trigger a rebuild of your redeploy of your app every time you write a new block. So in that
Kind of
case,
CMS. If
yeah,
you are integrated with the CMS, so you can.
right. There are ways to write plugins. So you can write it as a plugin. One thing we forgot to talk about is components. So generally, what happens is you would want to write components when you're building applications. It's really hard to do things without components. You
Right.
kind of need them. So there is a way in Abell to write components that you can reuse.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say I want to have a component. Again, it's not important to have a components directory, but I'll just
Mm-hmm.
have it. And I'll call this hero.abel.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the default component setup where I have a template, a style, and a script. So template here is the HTML that we write. Whatever we can do over here, we can do in this part as well. I can just say div and const a equals 3, and let's just write it inside a. So this is valid here. Uh, all of this works. Style here is actually a style that will, let's actually use this.
Mm-hmm.
So I can require this hero component here. So const hero equals require, and I want to go use it from the components directory and .abel. It
Mm-hmm.
is important to have .abel here. It
Okay.
won't work if you don't have .abel. And then I can just define it like this, the way we define in the normal frameworks. So I actually wanted to make this closer to frameworks, the way we do it in frameworks,
Mm-hmm.
because that is kind of syntax that we're again familiar with. I'll run the dev server again. Um, then execute package.json. Oh yeah, I don't have package.json. I was running it through npx, right? Let's actually install. This is the right way of installing things. It's not ideal to just do npx. So I've installed it here.
Mm-hmm.
Let scripts and dev Abil serve. So when we run npm run dev, we'll run Abil serve
Mm-hmm.
and npm run dev now. So yeah, this is just giving me warning that I don't have a configuration file. We can do it without that.
Ah.
So as you can see, it printed 3 from the components, from the component that we wrote, const equals to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so now what I want is, let's say this is the hero component.
Mm-hmm.
Let's actually make it a navbar, which I
Mm-hmm.
can reuse, like later in different files as well. So if I have this navbar, and I'll just call it and navbar. Now what I want is I want to style this component.
Mm-hmm.
Actually change names as well. just looks good.
Mhm.
Um, let's say now. now. Um, Now what I want to do is, again, I have navbar, I'm navbar, that prints I'm navbar. I want to style this navbar. So the way
Mhm.
I can do is I can just write my styles over here. So let's just call background color tomato, oh, tomato, and it will color it. Now this is where things get tricky. What can happen is, let's say you have multiple components and you
Mhm.
write styles like this. Let's say you have more
Right.
navbars. What can happen is one component can end up overriding styles of the other component, and it's really hard to debug if that
Right.
happens. So in Abell, everything that you write inside style here is a scope by default. Uh,
Oh.
what I mean by scope is, even though it just says nav, it just says nav. I don't have any specific selectors, right? If I write a
Mhm.
nav over here and let's say I am nav from parent,
Mhm.
that background color tomato won't be applied here. So it's easier to, it just keeps your code sane. It's
Mhm.
easier to debug it, and it you won't mess things up easily. So the styles we write over here are scoped. We
Mhm.
have a ways to make it unscoped. So we can
Mhm.
just write global,
Okay.
and as you can see, it colored the outer navbar as well, but it's not recommended. I don't think so you need
Mhm.
this in most of the cases. So yeah, this is a scope styling that we will go more into details on how this works. uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, we as I said, I can just write HTML, I can write style. Now if I can see the dot debug, I can, in fact we're not using this, right?
Mhm.
We can delete data. Dot debug is something that keeps updating as a change. So you can just come here and see what all files are being generated.
Mhm.
So as I said, I don't really have any script now. I don't have any JavaScript. So what it outputs is just HTML. It adds this script, but it doesn't really have any JavaScript. So it's not loading anything. And I have this CSS file which I created, and it has this data. We'll talk about this why it has it. So it just generates the output that is only needed and won't output any additional things. What I can also do is change things inside say JavaScript. So this is now the front end JavaScript. What you said during, like what we discussed a few time ago, the APIs. You can write
Mhm.
API calls over here if they're specific to components. Then it will just take care of basically it will take care of this is client side JavaScript, right? I'm not
Mhm.
writing it inside curly braces. So
Mhm.
all this is rendered on the client side. I can say inner HTML changed on client side, and if I just go to this page, as you can see, it has changed on client side.
Mhm.
But now one tricky part is it changed the outer nav and not really the nav inside our component, because this isn't scoped right
Gotcha.
now, right? Because again, like I said, the problem that we talked about in CSS that can happen in JS also, where
Mhm.
you don't really have a scope, so you can end up changing things outside the component. It can eventually get difficult to debug, because how do I tell where this thing, why this thing is changed without really going to component?
Mhm.
So for the way we do it in a style where we just have scope by default, in JavaScript, what we in fact do is just replace document.query selector with scope selector, and then it will take care of scoping. It didn't change anything in the outer component; it just changed things inside the component. So we just change scopes document.query selector with scope selector, and it just works.
Mhm.
Now, as I said, this is changed on the client side. So if I go to view page source, I can still see I am navbar over here. But in the main.abil.js, I have this new JavaScript generated that changed things on client side. Again, we'll talk about why this
Mhm.
in a minute. But yeah, this way we get to write a reusable component. Now I can create a different page. Say if I just say your about.abil,
Mhm.
Everything that we write, so everything that starts with HTML, and that is a page, and everything that starts is wrapped inside a component is a component. So that is one differentiation that we have to
Mhm.
remember. Now I can just reuse this here as well, where I just say const now require. Let me just copy paste, and I can add nav over here. If I go to slash about, I have this navbar rendered over here as well. So we get to reuse all the styles, scripts, and HTML. So what you get is a complete component with all the styles, scripts, HTML wrapped inside it. So it gets easier to have a complete component without really caring about where the styles are, where the scripts are, how do I import scripts separately, all of that. So yep, we can reuse it. So yeah, I think we covered most of the parts, the components, the pages,
Yes.
and we can use the normal JavaScript. I can also pass it props. So let's say I only want to, I'm passing brand, and let's just say here I want to pass I am about, and here I'll say I am index props brand I am index. Props is the only attribute that you can pass. So if you want to pass any value, you just have to pass it through this object.
Mhm.
So this is to avoid the overall confusion of if I say hello, is this a string? Is
Mhm.
this a number? Is what
Mhm.
exactly type of this? So it kind of ideally you can just pass hello and three. This is a number. This is a string. So, and pass props. Now we're passing props. We want to handle props over here. I can say props dot, actually let's see what are props. I don't know what props are. Yeah, so I printed, as you can see, it printed I am about and I am in text because I'm
Mhm.
calling this twice. So I have this prop called props dot brand.
Mhm.
I can just render over here, and now I'm changing things here. Let me just remove this JavaScript. Did it print it?
I can see it in
Props.
console.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'm printing console log. You have to remove this. I end up doing this in with demos. Yeah, I have I am index in the index page, and
Ah,
on about I have I'm about. So you can pass props into dynamic things.
oh, that's
So
cool.
yep, that covers. I think that this is the whole Abil. There isn't
Mhm.
any additional thing on top of this. This is like a tutorial now.
Oh, cool. So we had one question from Twitter. So let's take that in case I cannot see any question in chat, but in case you have, just please
Yeah.
ask. So there was a question about the inlining of CSS. So someone had question
Mhm.
how you are doing it in Abell.
Yeah. So yep, I can share my screen. Um, let's just go to this example only. Where is this running? Localhost 5000. So how the inlining works, right? So if I go to view page source, as you can see, there is this data Abel, this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so if we talk about CSS for a second, um, ignore the above part. This is like temporary just for explaining.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this and set some values,
Right.
any values, this is applied to all the navs, right? All
Right.
the navs inside the everything. But
Mm-hmm.
now what we want is we just want to apply it to nav that is inside this component.
Mm-hmm.
So what we can do instead is I can just programmatically inject something like, let's say, data xyz,
Mm-hmm.
and not even needed data, even data is not needed, anything that any attribute xyz, let's say, and I can just say xyz. This is now this becomes a selector where select me all navs that have xyz attribute, and
Right.
then apply styles to that part. So instead of xyz, what I have is data Abel and some hash,
Mm-hmm.
random hash, and then in the CSS, what I do is I just add that hash over here.
Ah,
So
okay.
what happens is it now selects the nav elements that have this attribute, and all the elements inside this component are going to have a particular hash assigned to it, and it is going to be same for one component. So what we end up getting is styles that is only applied to the components inside the Abil file. So if I just go to the actual code now, as you can see, I didn't exactly write anything here, right?
Right.
It's just a nav. Because I didn't add any additional attribute over here. But in the code, as you can see, I have actually this thing injected over here, which is a hash and data dash Abel. And inside the Abel file, you can see I have the same hash, which
Select.
is here applied. So it just makes sure that we only select the element that are inside the component. As you can see, this is actually outside the component, right? So it
Correct.
doesn't really have any hash. If I set this to global, what will happen is we just as you can see, I have this applied to both because I have set it to global. This didn't really add any hash over here, and even in the Abell JS, I didn't add any hash as an attribute. So it ignores that and just applies to global.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
good.
is basically how it works. I just inject these things to HTML attribute and then to style. There's a Harshit Pant on Twitter who contributed this part. So yeah, that's that. That's it. That is exactly how JavaScript works as well. So if I write script and say scope selector, now I'm just ignoring the rest of the part. But yeah, again, it added the hash. If I go to JavaScript file, it so I have this scope selector now, but what it did over here is while compiling, I just changed scope selector document.query selector, and it did this plus thing and added the attribute as a selector. So it makes sure that the scripts are scoped as well. Yeah,
That's cool.
that is how it works.
Great. So we have two questions from the chat. So let's take them. First question is from Gaurav. I want to think of a use case when it would be better to use Abel rather than going for frameworks or libraries like Angular, React, or Ember. So
Yeah.
what do you?
So yeah, one use case is where you don't have much of the dynamic things on the client side. For example, if there are websites that are a lot interactive. For example, if it is an e-commerce website where you want to click buy and then the cart changes the number, and inside the cart you have this elements there. So these parts, if you have to do it in Abil, you'll have to do it in the vanilla JavaScript, which can get difficult because you're just writing vanilla JavaScript, doesn't have much of the helper functions. Whereas the frameworks like React, Angular, Ember, or any other framework, client-side framework, for example, they provide some better functionalities, some better libraries. You have state management, so you have these things which help you in just taking care of all that part.
Right. Santosh has this question: how to create an extension like .abel.foo? So
Yeah. So you can create any extension. I can just create a file with say hello.saurabh, and that's a valid extension. The question is how do you run the thing that is inside that file? So what you essentially write is again even your compilers don't really know what extensions are. Extensions are just your distinguishing that this file needs this compiler and this file needs a different compiler. So if I create a .saurabh file, it is valid. Your file system can handle it. Now I want to say I have a different syntax for a Saurabh file, and so I write a certain let's say a different way, a different syntax, and then I just write a compiler that takes that syntax and outputs something that your computers understand. So that is actually a more important question where how to write compiler for that particular code.
cool. So let's move on to the next question. What's the roadmap? So we have seen what Babel is, what Abel is, and we saw the demo as well. But what's the roadmap? What's coming?
Yep, I'll share my screen again.
Yeah.
Um, have created a issue on my Abil directory. So we can go to abil.js/abil, and this has all the code that is needed for Abil. Inside this, I have a project where I have an Abil1 project, and I just have some to-dos over here. So I think one interesting part is the dynamic routing. So I can just go to this issue, and there is actually a discussion in the Abell discussion 1.1. You can go through the project, and now one problem here is things are bound to a certain way of writing directories. For example, I didn't talk much about the content and the how the Abell handles Markdown, because it is very likely that it will change. But you can actually create a content directory, and if I just go to this, this is a sample blog starter. So you can have this content and have hello world index.md, and I can just write my Markdown over here, and what I can do is I can create inside the theme folder. I can create this path and index.table, and I can say here I'm saying blog content. So this is actually a more complicated version, but what you can essentially do is you can import this import content method from Abil. Abil is something that you have accessible directly, which has some helper functions that you can use. So you can use import content and pass it in path of Markdown file, and it can import, and it handles all the Markdown to HTML conversion for you and does all the thing, and you get the HTML content. But now, the reason why this isn't really the best way of doing is because we kind of bind things to a specific way of writing directories, and so it kind of has some limitations. For example, what if I have two sets of content and I want to loop over two sets of content and have two different layouts for that? That is not possible right now. So that is one issue that we want to solve. That is part of the roadmap for before going for version 1. So yeah, these are like some solutions that I'm thinking about. None of them are really final. So trying to have, let's say, a file where I can pass it template and what to output, and I can just pass content, context, and the directory, and just take care of Markdown to HTML conversion directly. Because as I showed, you can just import the Node.js packages. So rather than having that additional abstraction level, you can just go below that abstraction and say that I'm just going to use my own let's say Markdown to HTML conversion, and maybe as a helper I can provide a preset with something with configurations. So this is like one major thing before going to version 1. Prefetching page on link hovers. So what generally this websites do, or static site generators or a lot of frameworks do, is if you hover over a link, for example this link, as I hover over this link, it just starts fetching this page. So when I click the page, I have that page ready, which I can just route to without really any delay. So it kind of speeds up your going from one page to other. So that is one issue, and there is a bug where what happens is if you have two files and both of them are using same component and they have a same JavaScript, then even if one file is it is bundled into main.abil.js, a file called main.abil.js during the output. But what happens is it just outputs things. For example, if I'm using nav.abil inside the index.abil, and I'm not really using it inside the about.abil, but still it has the code in the code of nav.abil, the JavaScript of nav.abil is inside the main.abil.js, right? So for about.abil, this code is actually unnecessary. It's not executing. So that is one issue. So the reason why it is part of 1.2.0 is because it's a breaking change. It'll probably like break some few things. So by semantic versioning, I'm just adding it inside the version 1. So can't really fix it before version 1.
That's
Yeah.
cool. So
So yeah,
another
you can.
question. Sorry.
So yeah, you can go to projects, and it has the all the roadmap.
Cool. So in case someone wants to get involved with the project, what do you suggest?
So you can see there is a discussions on GitHub. Abel has a discussions enabled, so you can go and drop in if you have any particular question that you want to know how this thing works. So you can just drop it in there, and I can jump in and probably reply and help if it is needed. So that is, if you have any questions, then you can reach out in that way. If you want to contribute, there is a contributing.md in the GitHub file of Abel. So you can go check it out and set up Abel. It's fairly easy to set up. You just have to install dependencies and you can get Abel running locally without really much of the configuration. So you can set up Abel, just play around things. Or Abel is like fairly new, so it is very likely that it will have some bugs. So if you're using it and you find a bug, you can create issue. Even creating issue is a big contribution. And then if you want to, then you can just go and create a pull request for that issue as well. So yeah.
That's good. Okay, so let's. I mean, we are almost done. So sort of anything you want to promote on the channel?
Um, Nothing really, just Abel. I think you can go check out its documentation on abeljs.org. And yep, I be doing like random things on GitHub, so you can check out my GitHub. It's Saurabh.
Uh-huh. Cool. So in case anyone wants to get involved with open source, I think just go ahead and check out the Abell. And I'm sure it's as Saurabh is saying, it's just started. So you can actually get involved early and see where you can get this project. So yep, that's it for the day, Saurabh. Thanks a lot for joining, and thanks a lot for your time. It was really I think I really love the conversation. I mean, how you implemented SSG, that's really great, and hope I wish you all the best with this project. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had fun, and thank you for like giving me opportunity to share my project.
Cool. So let's go on closing notes. We have another episode next Friday. It will be on at 10 p.m. IST, and we will have Shruti, who she works for PayPal, and she will be talking about GraphQL. So if you're interested, please join us next Friday 10 p.m. IST, and come with the question in case you have any. So thanks a lot. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and have a great weekend. Bye bye everyone. Bye Saurabh.
Yeah, bye.